All right, people, we are live, and this is a moment you've all been waiting for. Finally, we've got a superstar scientist and an atheist with us, and Lawrence Krauss. By the way, how should I address you? Professor Lawrence, Professor Krauss?
I don't care. Lawrence is
Okay,
fine. Whatever you're
okay.
comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay, Lawrence, thank you very much for being a part of the show. Let's get straight into it because we've only got an hour, and I wanted to ask you. 9 years ago, you had this debate with then famous Muslim apologist, Gorgeous George, or Hamza Tzortsis, you might remember him as.
Yeah.
Um, that was a turning event in the Muslim world, and I can understand probably you might not be uh, up to date with what's been happening in the Muslim world, how atheism is growing almost at the same pace as it did in the first part of the last decade or after 2005 in the Western world.
Oh, I didn't know
At
that.
that, no, yeah, you'd be surprised to see all the indicators is like Iran is close to 40%, which is just as much as the United States.
Wow, that's amazing.
Um,
Sorry.
it's yeah, no, you look great. So at that time, you were asking about a lot of Muslims became aware of this atheism versus Islam because every religion holds its own ideas that, okay, our religion is the best one. Yes, Lawrence and Dawkins and Sam Harris, these guys are targeting Christianity because Christianity is flawed already. We know that. But now, hang on. Now they became aware of this, and the new atheist movement is actually spreading to that, and the next generation of activists like ourselves. Our videos have been watched over 50 million times in India and Pakistan. So
Wow.
how do you see this, that this rising tide of atheism, could you have perceived that? Because I remember Professor Dawkins saying that he wasn't really confident with the Muslim world, but he was hopeful with the Western world.
Wow. First of all, it's a surprise, and I guess a pleasant surprise. I guess it's not. It's not. I guess it's not as surprising to me as it might be to Richard. The point is that um, the major difference between the Muslim world and the Christian world, and it comes. I've always thought from the fact that Islam is 600 years younger than Christianity or so, is that no one takes the Bible, well, almost no one takes the Bible literally, or the admonitions in the Bible literally. The people who call themselves Christians don't stone their children because they're disobeying them, or those sort of things. That passed hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And they like to pick and choose from the Bible to things they like, and they call themselves Christians or Jews or whatever based on, they just take what they like. Now, what always amazed me about at least the Islamic world of Islamic fundamentalists that I've been interacting with, like Hamza Tzortsis, is that the Quran is taken in the way the Bible used to be taken uh, 500 years ago, as the absolute truth, every word of it, the requiring adherence, etc. And that in the modern world, I think it's real. It's much harder to maintain um, that kind of fervent fundamentalist belief in things which, when you ultimately, when you look at it, you realize some of these things are clearly not right, and therefore you have to pick and choose. So I guess uh, I would suspect the rise of atheism is in direct response to the to the far greater fundamentalism in Islam than in Christianity. That has provoked a response, and it's like a long tail, right? There's a low hanging fruit, and all those people are going to respond, and then it'll take a lot longer, or who knows if it'll ever go all the way for the rest of the people to recognize the sort of uh, I was going to say silliness, but the inaccuracies of their sacred books. And so that's what's happened in Christianity. You see it go off, and then there's this slow decline. Um, and it's a slow decline because many people are comfortable calling themselves Christians, who are essentially, in all other senses, atheists, who basically don't take much of their sacred books as literally or real. And so as I say, I'm not too surprised, I guess, that it's falling off quickly um, in response to that fundamentalism. And unfortunately, the other aspect of Islamic fundamentalism has been violence and terror, and I think people um, people respond to that by saying, well, that religion must be quote unquote bad. Now, the Muslims who are not into that. I'm sure often feel hard done by because people identify Islam with Islamic fundamentalism and think of it as think of it as pure evil, and that's unfortunate for those people who practice their religion in a peaceful way that doesn't impact others. I still think it's the basis of it is it has no basis, but I don't mind what people think as long as it doesn't negatively impact on what they do. And anyway, so the fact that it's got a bad rap in the Western world, I think probably has had a overflow into the Islamic world where people look and say, if this provokes this kind of violence and terror, there must be something wrong with it. That's a long answer to a short question.
No, that was a very good answer, and it's obviously since Richard Dawkins and the so-called New Atheism movement started up, and then the reason why it was, even though the ideas, the arguments between Russell and even before that, Hume and Kant and all these guys, that's been going on for nearly 200-300 years in the Western world. It didn't really happen in the Muslim world, but the reason how, obviously, the various factors that might have contributed to that, and one of them being social media itself. But the New Atheist movement was so successful in the West that it was bound to have this impact in the Muslim world as well. By the way, we just had a census in Australia last year, but the results just came out, and you'll be surprised. Well, you shouldn't be surprised, as you said, in the case of Muslim world. But within 5 years, in 2016, we were 30% agnostics and atheists, or no religion. But now it's jumped to 40% in Australia.
I like to think I played a role. I used to. I used to do ABC all the time and talk. Anyway.
Yeah. No, you did. And what it did, and that leads me to my next question, because New Atheist movement, and especially you, and then you debated with a lot of people, and you were given a lot of hard time by a lot of by a lot of Muslim apologists at that time. And if I look at that 9-year-old video, there was discussion or points that you made up. You brought up were blasphemy and homophobia, etc. in Islam, but you didn't even bring up apostasy, for example, because I guess at that time it was ex-Muslim movement was still in its infancy, and not a lot of people know about this floodgates opening up. But you at that time, you, Professor Dawkins and Sam Harris and all the new, and obviously before that Christopher Hitchens, you guys never shied away from taking on Islam. Because it's a foreign religion, it's a brown man's religion, it's not my problems. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about the evils of Christianity in the far right. But that had its impact on us, people like us who were listening to you, watching you, and reading your books. By the way, we did your Universe from Nothing book in an 8-part series in Urdu, and we've been explaining it to so people love it. But now it seems like even Professor Dawkins, he stepped away from it. Like, nobody really talks about Islam. I get it that the new generation has come forward, like people like us who know Islam inside out, and we criticize it. But it just forces me to wonder, is that because this wokeism, this cancel culture has even had an impact on some influencers and educators like you as well, that maybe we shouldn't touch it?
Well, I think the cancel culture has had an impact in the sense that, in a different way, I think, first of all, we didn't shy away from criticizing Islam just because I think for most of us, it was not qualitatively different in the sense of, it was a religion like the others. And it had, obviously, in the modern world, it had a closer connection generally, but not always, to violence. So I think it was just a matter of, it was just another religion, and one shouldn't steer away from it. I think what's happened, the reason that many people maybe steer away, is unfortunately the atheist movement. It's kind of like, I don't know if you saw the movie Life of Brian, which is, in my mind, one of the Python movie, probably the most accurate portrayal of what it was really like at the time of Jesus. But if you remember, there were these, it splintered into these movements. There's this wonderful scene where they're in this Roman amphitheater, and someone says, "I'm from the Palestine Liberation Front." "No, but we're from the Liberation Front we're from the front for the liberation of Palestine." And they start arguing and fighting. And unfortunately, it seems, at least to me, that that's happened within the atheist movement, and that there is so much internal strife that for people like me, and I can't speak for Richard or others, that it just becomes it's it's it, it's not worth it to waste your time on that kind of political nonsense. And also, frankly, it again, it I've said what I've said, and I've done, and I've written what I've written, and you can, and at some point, you get tired of being asked to talk about those same things. I'd much rather be personally, as I told Richard, and even at the time, I've always said I'd much rather excite people with the realities of the real universe than criticize religion. I mean, it seems like just such a waste of time when you can instead try and get people to be excited about reality, and that's still for me my number one goal.
But that's what was different about you guys. That a lot of scientists who actually don't believe in religion. There was a Pew survey. I think it's only 33% of AAAS scientists believe in a god. So meaning the rest either don't believe in a god or like some vague deistic god or Spinoza's god or whatever. But that was different about you, that you said, no, you know what, we're going to come after the religion because
I think first of all, most scientists, most academics steer away from any controversy, steer away from anything that they try and keep their heads below the radar. It's just a property of academics. Most are cowards, and if they were able to deal with the real world, they probably wouldn't be academics for the most part. And because once you open up, it does expose you to a lot of things, and I think it comes down to this, that some of us had a public voice because of our science or our writing or something else. And the question is how to use that responsibly. So if you have a public voice, and that automatically removes most scientists, and there's a small set. And I know some people have had a public voice who say, no, I don't want to alienate anyone. And I remember I had a discussion with Sam Harris early on, and I sort of, Sam has just sort of gone off, and I'm kind of, in my mind, a kind of a one-trick pony. But the early on, Sam said something to me that actually had an impact. I was pointing out early on that, and I stood and it's still true, that science can't disprove the existence of God. So stop pretending that science can disprove the existence of God. Of course it can't. I can't disprove the claim that you and I were created 5 seconds ago, with the memories of false memories of an entire life. How could I ever? You can't disprove that kind of stuff. So I would point out that we should point out that science can't disprove the existence of God, but that's fine. But it's disingenuous to say that and not point out that the Bible and the sacred books are full of nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a discussion with Sam where I thought, it's probably, you can't just stop there. It's I'm not sure it's hypocritical, but it's not consistent, if you want to be honest about it, to say there. Yes, you can't disprove the existence of God, but you certainly can disprove a lot of the false claims that are made and once I realized that, I guess I became more vocal. But for me, it was also a matter of defending science. I got involved in it by trying to protect the teaching of evolution in biology classes in high schools. That's how I got that, sort of that notoriety nationally. Is I was disappointed that none of the biologists were doing it, and it really wasn't an attack on biology; it was an attack on science anyway. And as a scientist with a fairly large public following, I felt it was an obligation to do that. But that was it. It was really more a defensive maneuver and attacking sort of the fundamentalist beliefs. But then my own perspective evolved when we made that movie, The Unbelievers, because the response to that movie amazed me. I realized it wasn't just the fundamentalists who were problematic here. It's all those people who have questions, like everyone has questions, but they don't know that they're allowed to ask those questions. They feel like bad people for asking those questions. They live in small towns in, say, the United States, and they not only is there no one they can ask those questions to, but they're even afraid to admit they have the questions because the people around them will view them as bad people for asking those questions, and they have no one to turn to. And then they see a movie like that, and they say, "Hey, I'm not alone. It's okay to question." And for me, that was the most important impact. I realized it's not just the fundamentalism, it's the hijacking of morality that religion has that stops people from asking questions. And as an educator and a scientist, stopping people from asking questions is the worst thing you can do. It shuts out thinking, and it shuts out progress, and it shuts out life.
Yeah, but you said that then you thought, it's just not worth it, because it comes with all the other stuff. Especially if you make a discovery about the Big Bang or whatever, some cosmological event which is far bigger than any of us, but that wouldn't draw any, and any blowback. But having said that, though, what you guys initially did from 2004-5 onwards, up until 2012, 13, that has caused a revolution. Like, as I said, you would
Well,
not have
it's great to
imagined.
know it's had an impact. It's you never know, and sometimes you worry that you're preaching to the converted. And again, that's one of the reasons we made the movie. I think to try and reach a broader audience than and it's great that it's had an impact. And as I say, it's not. I remember when we were in Sydney at the Opera House. I think it was
Hmm?
at the Opera House, which
Yeah,
I've now done twice, I think, or three times. I'm honored to have sat on the stage of
nobody
that.
lets me in.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored that I did on that stage a bunch of times. But anyway, I think someone asked, maybe anyway, somewhere in Australia, how can you convince people to join your movement or to follow you or something like that? And Richard answered, and I echoed it. We don't want people to follow us. We just want people to think and ask questions, and that's the difference. There's no one, and I don't even like talking about a movement. People, I'm not a part of any movement. I'm just a scientist and a person who tries to encourage people to think, ask questions, and open their minds. So I guess I don't, that old Groucho Marx line, I really don't like being a member of any club that would have me as a member. And uh, so I think that it's great that there's been an impact, but I don't like the idea of having it turn into a movement, because that automatically becomes like a secular religious movement, and I see it happening in the United States. In the atheist movement, there's this woke attitude, and it's basically secular religion. There's certain things you can't that are accepted as universal truths, and you can't debate them, you can't question them, whether it has to do with racism, sexism, or something else. And any discussion gets you excommunicated, and so it's just like a secular religion.
Yeah, yeah. You just briefly touched fact on your conversation with Sam Harris when you said, you can't disprove God, and yes, we've always known that, but as you rightly pointed out, that hang on a second, people are not necessarily interested in the God question. What they're interested in proving that their God and their religion, with the whole set of baggages that it comes with, that's the correct one. So we all, and this is the reason why we're just referred to 33% of AAA scientists believe in a God, but then there's a big 20% or something that believe in something that they can't explain. So that's irrelevant. I call it the God of irrelevant. That's just totally irrelevant. If he doesn't know, if he hasn't spoken to me, he's just as relevant as some alien species. So
Yeah,
people
it's
are
just something
interested in that. Yeah.
people need something to believe in, and also when people point out that, I think in the case of the National Academy of Sciences, like something like 95% believe well, but the real surprising question is that 5% do, and do believe in it. But when you're taught things as a child, it's really hard to get rid of them. But you're right, people want and I think that's how you can reach people, is pointing out. I wasn't the first person to say it, and Richard wasn't, I'm sure, but that religious people are just like atheists. It's just one less religion they don't believe
Yeah.
in, and try to think of ways to get people to question their own situation. As a teacher, that's what I try and do, have tried to do anyway. It's the only way people learn. And I had an awakening with Richard, and I've talked about it. I forget how well I knew Richard then, but I certainly heard him lecture, and he showed a picture of you've heard me probably talk about this, of four kids at Christmas time in a newspaper, and
Yeah.
there's 3 or 4 year old kids, and they say, here's a Christian kid, here's a Hindu kid, here's a Muslim kid, here's a Jewish kid,
Yeah.
and then the point is, how dare we label 3 year olds that way? And then wow, I thought, I never realized, I never thought about that. So that's the kind of thing where you can sort of wake people up to ask questions about the things we're complacent about, that we shouldn't be complacent about.
Yeah, Professor Dawkins. I think he was the first one. I think. Well, at least I heard this argument for the first time in the God Delusion as well. He discussed that, and he called it's akin to child abuse. And the
Oh,
more
I've
I
heard that
speak with,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a common logical answer.
We
But
said I remember we said in Ireland that caused a big uproar when we were together in Ireland. We said it was religion was child abuse. But anyway, sir, go on.
yeah, okay, just moving on. Because this thing now, what you guys experienced in the West,
Hmm.
nearly 15 years ago now, this sudden this non-apologetic way of questioning religions. We're doing that in India and Pakistan, and a lot of people are drawn to it. And our case is slightly a bit different. Like I'm a hunted man because I'm an
Oh, really?
expert of.
Oh, I mean, that's the point. Let me point that out. People say, I'm sorry to keep interrupting. People know I interrupt, but
It's
uh,
okay.
somehow people say we're somehow brave. Richard and I say, no. Look at the people whose lives are at risk in Pakistan, maybe India, but other places. I get letters from people all the time who have to keep their views quiet from Afghanistan or you pick the country, and that's the kind of those people are brave, and those people it's a much bigger threat than just having people write angry letters.
Mm.
There's no, or even attempt to cancel us. I mean, that's nothing compared to what people in Pakistan or other places are dealing with, who are trying to educate people.
But having said that, though, I would also take the liberty to say I don't think I'm brave because I'm living sometimes in Europe, sometimes in Australia. So I'm privileged that I'm not in Pakistan. But I certainly know people, activists from within Pakistan, who've been killed, and people who are seeking asylum, and they've been waiting for 5 years to resettle to America or Canada or United Kingdom. So those people are actually brave, and they have a
Yeah,
lot of my
yeah.
respect as
And
well.
I know I get
Uh,
letters from people. We try to help them, but anyway.
CFI is probably the only organization that's actually helping a lot. There's no secular movement for atheists, and I've felt it because
I
this
thought the international, what's it called, Atheist Alliance
International Atheist
International.
Alliance, yeah,
That
yeah,
they were doing some things, but anyway.
yeah,
And then
but CFI is, yeah, yep,
there's
sorry,
be, borders,
yeah,
belief about whatever it's called. There's that group.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. They're very limited. They
Hmm.
don't actually help out asylum seekers. Like for example, what happens with these people? First of all, they have to get out of their home country, and then they
Yeah.
go to these other countries, and they
Hmm.
stay there, and they go to UNHCR and they apply for
Yeah.
asylum, and then that process can take up to 4, 5, 6 years for them to be resettled into these Western countries. So in that meantime, who's going to look after them? So CFI, to the best of my knowledge, is the only one that actually gives them some allowance, and they can live there with dignity. So
Well, that's good. It's
um,
nice to know CFI does something useful. I don't see them doing much useful in the States, but it's nice to know they're doing something useful elsewhere.
no, yeah, I have enormous respect for them.
Well, that's
I
great.
wanted to I wanted
Mhm.
to ask you the because this movement is in its infancy, so we are trying to replicate what happened in
Okay.
post 9/11, and we're doing the same questions, like very simple questions like that, like something you said, like everyone is an atheist. We just go one god further, god of irrelevance. And also the moral problems within Islam are so bad that majority of Muslims had never heard of them. Like, I mean, I'm sure if I showed you some of the sayings of the Prophet, you'd be shocked beyond belief.
Yeah.
You would
Well,
say,
yeah, I'm often shocked. People show me these things as I learn. Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that.
but people become obviously defensive. But I've had thousands of letters and videos. People call me in my show, and they change their mind. So there's always hope. But now people like me, I'm saying that with all humility. I'm probably the biggest Pakistani atheist who does a show in Urdu. So from
Okay.
my a lot of people have heard. So biggest clerics in Pakistan and even in the Muslim world, the world has changed a lot since your Hamza Tzortsis interview. Every scholar worth his salt has said atheism is rising in our community. What do we do? And they're trying to reinterpret. They're trying everything. They're just clutching at straws to do something. But with us, because they can't reach out to you, they say, well, Western atheists are better people. They are very academic in their approach. They don't target religions. And because we come from Islamic background, and in Pakistan and India, well, obviously Islam and Hinduism we're going to talk about. So it seems very confronting to them. And I always say, no, have you not heard of Lawrence Krauss? Have you not heard of Richard Dawkins? And obviously they haven't. So why do you call yourself an atheist? And why is it important to actually go after religions? I know you don't do that anymore, but why is it important?
Well, I think it's important for the reason that you just pointed out, that people need examples. And if they don't see that people either like themselves or people that they look up to for other reasons are willing to say they're atheists, then how can you expect that? How can you expect them to be willing to even recognize that they are? So I think it's important, and it's important to speak the truth. I mean, I have a colleague of mine who's a Nobel Prize winning scientist who I have great respect for as a scientist, zero respect for, because he constantly says, no, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't think it's good to, there's all these rationales that people give for not speaking out. And they accept, I say, but, I understand you don't want to antagonize people. That's fine. But you agree that that these ridiculous fundamentalist claims are just wrong and demonstrably wrong, empirically wrong. Yes. Then why don't you say that? And why don't you point out that if some of the claims of the scriptures are wrong, then it's possible that the whole thing is, or you can't, that it's not, whatever the word, that the Pope is infallible. It's not infallible. And if it's not infallible, then you can start asking questions about everything. Anyway, I think it's important that just like I think it's important that some scientists speak out about science and about science policy. Not every scientist, but I think people sometimes need role models. They also need to realize that people are not afraid to say something that for some people is sacrilegious. The claim that you don't find God, the idea of God compelling, should not be something that brings a reign of terror upon you, death and destruction, or even shock, as it does in many places, because people are afraid to say it. And as long as people are afraid to say what they're thinking, and most people, and let's face it, many people who call themselves Christian in the Western world are atheists, but they'll never say it because, in fact, and I've talked about this, but the survey that was done by Richard's Foundation in England, where they asked Christians, do you believe in this, and this, all the things in the Bible? They said, no. Why do you call yourselves a Christian? And they said, well, I like to think of myself as a good person. And that's, once again, the fact that religion has usurped morality.
And these were the people who couldn't even tell whether Genesis was the first book or not.
Yeah, I know exactly. I mean, I imagine most people who are Christian have done very little reading of the Bible. I read a lot more of the Bible. I looked at the Quran when I was younger too, but I learned a lot more about the Bible, Old and New Testaments, once I started sort of speaking out about religion, because my colleagues like Richard and particularly Christopher Hitchens were able to give me, lots of examples of things that I hadn't realized how ridiculous were in there.
You said you read a little bit of the Quran when you were younger. So are you telling me you didn't find anything that turned your heart, that lifted?
Well, no, I read a lot. I just read a lot of things when I was younger, and I thought I should at least look at it. I think when I was young, I wanted to believe in stuff. At the time, I thought of, but I grew up in Canada. I guess it was quaint. I just thought of it as kind of an interesting, maybe it was an interesting bit of literature that I really didn't think people took it seriously. So I guess I figured an ancient book that I should look at, just like I looked at ancient books of Greece and Rome, to understand the culture around me. And so I guess I never thought of it as something. I never even thought of it as something I should even believe. It just was clear to me that it would. Some people talk about the wisdom of the ancients, but the ancients didn't have a lot of wisdom.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because the huge part in India, a lot of my audience is in India as well, and they also have this obsession. Now, you might have seen it in the news somewhere: Hindu nationalism rising and far right, and India sitting on a powder keg. But they have this obsession, and it seems like there's there's a lot of funding coming from the state level. But without going into a conspiracy part, there was actually there was a news story written by New York Times that said that they have this obsession that our ancestors knew everything. They knew how to fly planes. They discovered MRI machines and all that. Why do you think there's such obsession? And I look at every culture that is.
Well,
that
I think
advancing
again, I think we want to believe. I just think it comes down to that. And ancient cultures are exotic, and I think, and because religious belief harkens back to those ancient cultures, and people are taught early on that these sacred books were given back then, it's natural to assume that somehow back then people had access to some realities that we don't today. And so it's I think it's and writers, it's easy to play off that. There was what Chariot of the Gods it was called, and the that said, I think it was aliens came down and gave the wisdom, and so I think it's
ancient
it's
aliens
easy to play off people's hopes and desires, and charlatans do just that and do it well.
How do you look at this Sam Harris's argument about psychedelics? And because Sam Harris said it, that's why I always was intrigued about it. But if anyone else had said it, I probably wouldn't have cared, because my mom told me to stay away from drugs, and I always did. But he says that we assume that all these guys were charlatans, these prophets, and they were just, they were very clever, conniving, cunning people who took advantage and make most out of their gift of gab, or but if you've tried, DMT or something, then you would think that there might be something more to it. They're genuinely having some vision. I get it, albeit that would still be crazy. It might not have anything to do with reality. But how do you see it? Do you think that these were charlatans, or they were just seeing things?
Look, I don't understand. Sam's fascination with Buddhism and drugs are two things I don't understand, and he seems to somehow, like many things, he seems to think that unless you've had his experiences, you somehow can't understand the world, and it's just garbage. It's not true. You don't need to take drugs. You don't need to, even, as far as I'm concerned, you don't need to meditate. It's not as if these are unique ways of exploring yourself and the world around you. They've helped him, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. But his notion that somehow psychedelics reveal something. I mean,
Don't reveal anything.
They're a novel human experience, and for people who want to have novel human experiences, every experience you have informs you in some way. So I'm not suggesting that people can't get informed or have new realizations by taking psychedelics. The thing that I question, and the thing that I think is nonsense, is the claim that that's the only way to reach enlightenment, and that's nonsense.
Yeah, that would be very difficult to assert that you could only come with that. But I think your late friend Christopher Hitchens said in one of his last interviews with ABC or something it was, where he said that I'm angry that I'm dying so soon. My father drank and smoked, but when I look back, I don't regret it, because had I not drunk or had I not been smoking, I would not have written what I've written. I'm just paraphrasing him, obviously. So could there be something that, like some of these experiences, you said that, we can't say if Shakespeare was drunk when he was writing all this great work, but could it be something?
Some people rely on, I mean, everyone has a drug of choice, and we all rely on things that help us get through the day. And so that's fine. I mean, some people need to drink, some people need to smoke, some people need to not drink. Some people need to, we're all individuals. And so if it floats your boat, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, I don't really care about it. And so I suspect, I mean, I know, having been a friend of Christopher's, he couldn't have done what he did without smoking and drinking. I don't know if that was related to the reason he got his cancer.
Yeah.
But I think it's a mistake to regret. Well, it's a mistake to regret lots of things, but if you think something is harmful for you, then you should stop it, and and harmful for the people around you, in particular. Obviously, alcoholics hurt their families in ways that are reprehensible or unfortunate. But in any case, so yeah, I think if people, in order to be productive and happy and good for others, they need some personal crutch, then who am I to argue against it?
Right, fair enough. You did say that you read the Quran, so I'm just gonna put something in front of you because there was an obsession. Oh, by the way, congratulations! After your debate with Hamza Tzortsis, he actually changed his worldview. He actually made he said that we should not say that Quran has scientific miracles in there. But you remember when you actually I'm sorry, you told him, hey, you don't know anything about science. You were so, and that was good.
Yeah,
That gave us a lot of, and that's true. Before you, a month or 2 months before you, he had a debate with a Pakistani professor, physicist, Pervez Hoodboy. I don't know if you've heard of him, but you should.
yeah,
You should bring him to Origins podcast sometime. I think he teaches at Berkeley or something.
yeah.
He yeah, so he changed his views. So thanks to you, because with Pervez Hoodboy, he was saying that there's M theory in the Quran, and Professor said, "Well, you don't know anything about M theory. Come up on the blackboard and draw the equation of M theory." And
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh, I don't know." So he dropped that idea, but there's still a lot of people. I don't know if you ever heard of this Muslim apologist, Dr. Zakir Naik.
People send me names and videos. Usually, I ignore them.
Yeah. He speaks like the brother has a very good vision. that guy, maybe. Okay. So anyway, so he popularized this idea that there is the Big Bang in the Quran. The Earth goes around the sun, and there's nothing. So I'm just going to show you some verses. Now, obviously, you're a scientist. Now, people like me, when I bring it up, they say, "Well, Horace, you're not a scientist." So I'm going to bring up something in front of you, and I'm going to ask you, maybe, am I missing something? Or you as a scientist, if the creator of the universe was trying to give us something, was that a good way of conveying message? So this is Quran chapter 11 verse 7. It says, and he it is who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and his throne was upon the water. So Muslims try to reinterpret it and say, well, his throne was above the water. So when there was, before the Big Bang, there was water, and above that there was a throne, and God was sitting on it. Is there any way you can interpret it which is in sync with the reality that we know?
No. And in fact, I wrote a book, my very first book, about dark matter, explored these notions, and in fact, this notion that water was the primordial substance certainly goes. The thing that people have to realize is that every religion steals from the religions before it, and it's identical. This Jesus story happens so many times in so many other religions. There's nothing special about it. And similarly, water was a central part in the Rig Veda. If you go back thousands of years, you'll find somehow the notion that the planet emerged out of water, and it even occurs in the Bible. Of course, the remarkable thing is, if you create the heavens and the earth, where was the water? And you haven't yet created water. So the point is that it's allegorical, but it's also a direct theft of the idea that's thousands of years older than Islam. But anyway, so if the notion that let's make it quite clear: at the early history of the universe, there was no water, there were no atoms, there were no structures, but this is an old religious idea, not a scientific one that Islam has clearly adopted.
By the way, Quran's very repetitive as well, so I don't know how you could actually keep focusing on it. So the same thing is written in another verse, so ignore that. There was one more thing. He's the one who has created everything that is on earth for you. Then he turned to heaven and perfected it as 7 heavens. So basically, earth was created before the heavens, and if by heavens you mean the sky.
My dog doesn't like it, as you can see. My dog objects. Of course, what does that mean? It means nothing. But you know what? I get all these people who send me these quotes that are often so vague, and they say, "Oh, it says the earth was." It says that the universe was created. Well, that's the Big Bang. They clearly knew this. And it's like it's so vague it could explain anything. It could relate to anything. It doesn't explain anything, however, unlike science, which tells you what the implications of the Big Bang are. This is just some vague claim. Anyway, sorry, go on.
But not only just that, I mean, this is the infamous Quranic, Big Bang verse. Have not those who disbelieve seen how heaven and earth were once solid mass, which we ripped apart? So obviously there was no earth at the moment of Big Bang. And who are these disbelievers who did not see this? Like this obviously refers to what was already happening in the
well, there wasn't
what was
solid
already
mass.
believed.
We're talking about the fact that the Earth was bombarded by a Mars-sized object which tore out the moon. That's fine, but there was no life then for sure, and in fact, nothing was solid in the early. There was no solidness that created the heaven and the earth. Okay, the solidness occurred later, not at the beginning.
Right. My point to bring that up was it's amazing how when we actually look at the text, they rely so heavily. They say, 6 days means 6 billion years or something.
Yeah.
Try to reinterpret it, try to reinforce it. But when you talk to them about the deep, meaningful questions, like the God that we can't disprove, then they go into sophistry. Then they go like, oh, what was there before the Big Bang? It must have been. Well, hang on, whatever was there before the Big Bang. What is your God saying here? He's saying that he created the heavens and earth in 6 days, and then his throne was above water.
Yeah, just ask him where in their sacred book does it explain the abundance of helium in the universe? I mean, the point is that these vague claims are as old as people. People invented, as I say, ancient myths. There are thousands of religions. They all have similar claims about some being raising the earth out of water or creating this or that vaguely, and none of them in any way explain anything. Just like you could say, and then some people will claim the opposite. If they knew so much, how come the Bible doesn't have dinosaurs in it? But forget that. I mean, it's just. If you're sufficiently vague and your claims are sufficiently grand, there's no way you can disprove them. But the point is that they don't explain anything. They don't predict anything. They don't allow you to do anything that you couldn't have done before. They don't give you any insight. They're just vague claims, and they're not novel. They're not profound. They're not sacred because they've been around as long as people have been around, and part of ancient religions and myths and beliefs. And so there's nothing special about them.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's move on to the last question. And by the way, it's not always vague. The equally respected, just one step below Quran, and some people argue is some of these hadith books, Sahih Bukhari, for example, is even higher than the Quran in some cases. And I don't want to delve into that now. Bukhari, the sayings of the Prophet are not really that metaphorical or allegorical. This one, I love to tell the story. So the Prophet, one day he was just going on his donkey with some other dude, and he just said, "Hey," Prophet said, "Do you know where does the sun go at nighttime?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know, Prophet. You would know." And then he says, "It goes under Allah's throne every evening and asks for the permission for Allah to rise again from the east, and Allah grants him that permission. And one day Allah is not going to give him the permission, and that would be the judgment day." So it's quite clear in this hadith that sun goes around the earth, and you always used to say that,
and that's the point. And it's clear in the Bible too. That's what I always say. If these books have great ancient wisdom, they didn't even know the earth went around the sun. And so if they didn't know the earth went around the sun, why are you assuming they know anything else?
Yeah.
Sorry, one last peasants, many of whom were illiterate. Anyway.
Right. Sorry. One last question to you. One of our great, we call her the mother of our ex-Muslim movement, and I know it's not like a political movement, but people like us are a bit activists.
Don't worry about it.
No, that's fine. I mean, I as atheists, we actually don't like the labels, and we say that if the whole world was an atheist, the atheist term would become redundant. But anyway, but it does need a little bit of political passion and a desire to change. Sure. If you're an academic, you can rely on your thing. But we're trying to. So anyway, so you had a conversation with Mariam Namazi, and Mariam said something that she was upset with Noam Chomsky, and because I am communicating with Indians and Pakistani all the time, and there's a lot of anti-American sentiment exists there, and they always quote people like Noam Chomsky, because he becomes their hero.
Yeah.
But you said, so Mariam said, I'm very disappointed with that. I agree with non-American adventurism or military adventurism. I think there's a lot of truth in that too, but anyway, that's a different topic. But he never talks about the women's rights or apostasy or blasphemy in these Muslim countries, and to which you said that, well, he's only focusing on one thing. He's not ignoring the other, but it's just an area of expertise, so to speak. But she still wasn't happy. Then you said that when you get a next opportunity, you'll actually bring that up and ask him about his views. So did that ever happen? Because that interview was about a year ago.
Noam and I talk all the time, and his concerns about people's freedom and rights are clear. I all I can say is what I told her in some sense. I think Noam's attitude is that other people can talk. He's going to focus on things that aren't brought up about the West, that need to be said about the West, that Westerners need to hear about their own countries, and that's where his interest is. And so, but I will next time I speak to Noam, I will push that a little more. I guess I'm sure. I can't remember after I spoke to Miriam whether I spoke specifically to Noam about that subject. We've brought it up. I think I brought it up when we've had several discussions. When he talks about one country or another, and I say, but the situation is worse here or there, and I think he generally agrees. And so I'm not going to be an apologist for Noam, and I think she's absolutely right that it's really that, and I think that's right now it's probably even more important because people talk about it, especially this woke movement, and it focuses on the crimes of the West, and ignores the crimes of people of color or ancient other cultures, and as somehow that's fine, but somehow the West has to apologize for everything it did, but no other country. What's his name? Just wrote a book, The War on the West. Douglas Murray, yeah, and he makes that point very strongly.
Yeah, but as an educator or as an influencer or someone who has a platform, a large voice, and people like us are always tested, like, why are you always speaking against Islam? Then I say, okay, I have the same opinion about Hinduism and Christianity as well. Yes, because I'm not very well versed on that. That's why I don't talk about it. But I think and I think Noam Chomsky should make those kind of clear statements. He doesn't have to talk day and night about it. His areas of expertise is that. But at least people like us.
I'll talk to him about it. We talk regularly, and it's a good point. And I probably didn't bring it up enough after Miriam pointed out. And I hope, as you know, I have great respect for her and admiration for her.
Great. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to just go through a couple of super chats that we've received by George Orwell. Great to see your channel grow and your reach to some really amazing people. Welcome, Professor Krauss. Zach Ross is saying, Harry's brother, thank you for setting up this conversation with Professor Krauss. I know it will be super interesting and informative. Professor Krauss, see you and Professor Dawkins in Phoenix, Arizona on November 15th. Unbelievers for the win. You're coming back after a very long hiatus, I would say.
Yeah, we're going to be together in November in Arizona. I hope there's still lots of tickets left, and I hope and we're trying to give away a lot to students in particular.
I might come to Arizona. Also, are you going to get other movie stars? Like you've spoken with Johnny Depp and I think Brad Pitt at one point, but Brad Pitt unfortunately fell off the rails a bit. I think he became Christian again. But
Johnny was a good friend of mine, so yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, Amit is saying, Professor Krauss, a big shout out from an ardent fan here. Learned so much from you over the years. Beatrice and Lawrence Krauss, can you please show us evolution evidence? Most of the times believers keep refuting it and keep asking why apes remains apes, and just a few these are some very basic questions. I don't know if you want to comment.
And the key question is the point is that we didn't evolve from apes and us co-evolved from a common ancestor, and that's what's really important to realize. It's the biggest misunderstanding, is that we didn't evolve from apes. We and apes evolved from a common ape-like creature probably 6 million years ago.
Yeah. Fact checker saying, Professor Krauss, you are one of my top inspirations. I did watch all your interviews and debates. Love to see you with Harris. Okay, thank you very much, fact checker. That was a show. Love for Harris. And definitely check out the Origins podcast. You would see all types of scientists and academics with Professor Krauss. And how's the podcast going?
It's going well. It's a lot of fun, and as you know, I try to expand the full gamut of not just science and culture, but even political views. And we this week we had for those people who really want to hear the early history of the Earth, we have Andy Knoll from Harvard talking about the first 4 billion years in the history of the Earth, and it's a fascinating discussion. I think next week we're going to have a discussion on exoplanets. Actually, Richard Dawkins and I are just recorded a long dialogue. And another thing that's very important for people, this person who talked about apes, I just recorded a podcast with someone I like a lot named Franz de Waal, who's one of the world's foremost primatologists. Talking about chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. Anyway.
Right. By the way, Professor Dawkins was very kind. Like I mentioned him in my book because he was the most inspirational figure in my life. But yeah, lucky you can call him a friend. I've been trying to get a hold of him for ages, but he did receive my book.
And you know, it takes time, but you know, he gets anyway. What can I say? Come on our trip to Greenland and Iceland. He won't be in Iceland, but come on our trip to Greenland. He'll be on that trip. Anyway,
Greenland? You guys going to Greenland?
My foundation runs excursions where we try and explore places around the world that are relevant for things like climate change. And we have a trip to Greenland in next month, or a month and a half to mid-September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where can people find more information about it?
The Origins Project Foundation website, which lists our trips and our podcast and our other events.
Okay, great.
Originsproject.org.
Greenland, yeah. I mean, I'm allergic to cold, but that's fine. I think we're solving it. We're heating up the Earth, so that wouldn't be a problem anymore.
Well, Greenland. The point reason I'm going to Greenland is I want to go there before it becomes green.
Yeah, right. Professor Krauss, please just check the trend of atheism in South Asia, created by Harris and then joined by Ghalib, is unbelievably spreading. We need some people like you and CFI to speak on the channels. Okay. Yes. So I wanted to ask you this question. Yeah. So fair enough. The new atheist movement has kind of spread and gone in other directions, and you're a scientist or an academic, and you've got so many other bigger and better and more interesting things to do.
No, let me say, I almost never talk about atheism in the U.S. Anyway, because I think it's a lost cause there. But I'm much more interested in when I do podcasts of talking to people in places like India or Iraq or Pakistan or South Asia. Because that, I think, is that's where it's important to have those discussions and where you normally can't.
Yeah. But having said that, a lot of ex-Muslims felt a bit neglected because after you guys, the huge army of influencers came out with YouTubers, and they're atheists basically, but they're Western atheists, and they have always stayed away from the ex-Muslim atheist community because it's like, again, it's the brown man's religion. It's just, I don't want to get it.
No, the ex-Muslims are the as I said to Mariam and others, even I think we had to take it out of the movie because people's safety was concerned. But they're the ones I admire the most because they're the ones who are really risking so much.
Well, thank you very much.
Anyway, I'm going to have to go in a minute. So.
Yeah. Okay. We've just done 53 minutes. Can I just get one question from one of our the refugees, asylum seekers that I was talking about, the people who have to leave the country, and he's the one who actually translated your book and explained it to. I think that video has been seen by nearly 300,000 people or something. Wow. So he just might have a scientific question to you, Ghalib. Hi. Please, Professor has to go.
This is Ghalib. Let me just introduce myself briefly. I am from Pakistan. I am basically an atheist coming from the Christian background. So I am not an ex-Muslim. I am an ex-Christian from Pakistan. In Pakistan, Christians are a very small minority, persecuted minority. So my question, Dr. Krauss, I'm really a big fan of you. Your books, The Story of Everything, and the other one, the Universe from Nothing. Universe from Nothing is actually one of my favorite books. And Aris and I did some, videos on that as well. So my question is, like, whenever we talk about the question of origin, it always comes down to, the religious would always say that God did the Big Bang, because I think last thing where they're hiding their God is in the Big Bang. So there are a lot of hypotheses the brain theory, the higher dimensional universes and the multiverse and everything. And most of them, we can say that those are hypotheses, that they don't have evidence, but they are mathematically plausible, they are possible. So, but the religious people present their God as a sure shot, evidence that universe was created by God. They think God is the reason for the creation of universe. But do you even regard God as a hypothesis for the creation of the universe? So you wouldn't even give God
no,
that,
I don't.
that. Yeah.
Look, I generally stopped calling myself an atheist a long time ago. I call myself an apatheist because God doesn't enter into my thinking at all. And the point is, the God hypothesis is not a hypothesis in science. I've been a scientist for 40 years at least. I've never heard the word mentioned once in any scientific conversation because it doesn't explain anything, and there's no, and you don't need it. As a famous French mathematician once said, I think to Napoleon.
So we cannot even consider it as a hypothesis, even.
Well, I don't even know. I don't. Well, you look, sure. I mean, you can make a hypothesis that there's an intelligent creator, and then you can ask to test it, and then you can say there's no evidence for that hypothesis. Moreover, it brings about lots of paradoxes. So many things that we tend to say that we throw it out. Just like I could make the hypothesis that there are unicorns on the moon, but that's a hypothesis. But I can very quickly argue that that's kind of nonsense, and I think it doesn't explain anything, and B, there's lots of counter evidence, and that's the way it is with the universe. That you can say that God created the Big Bang, and you can say, okay, so what? What evidence is there that in any way the Big Bang required a creation? And that's why I wrote the universe from nothing. You don't need anything. You don't need an outside force for that to happen. Moreover, if you assume it, it brings up all sorts of questions and paradoxes that don't produce fruitful answers, and therefore that's why science doesn't even bring up God, just like it doesn't bring up unicorns.
So any of these scientific hypotheses that we have, those God doesn't stand a chance against any of those.
No, the difference is, look, in science, a hypothesis is only useful if you can test it or if it makes predictions that are useful. And those things survive, and so obviously the God aspect doesn't do either, and so only things that ultimately explain something and allow you to make predictions you can test eventually in the long run survive in science.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Khaled. Thank you very much. And last question. Last question from you. His answer, Oppenheimer's quote from Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am deaf," when he looked at the nuclear bomb. Now that's been used by radical Hindus in India to buttress claims that our religion is the best. Similar thing with every other religious group. Do physicists think there is some science in Hinduism?
Well, first of all, A, I'm not expert in Hinduism, and B, my answer to the previous question is the same. Hinduism, Christianity, Islam are never discussed in science because they don't have any impact on science. So, as I've been much of my life a scientist, and I never hear anyone in any scientific conference talk about these organized religions in any way. And so maybe some Hindu scientists like something about the Hindu religion that they think says something useful, but it's not something they use in their work or in any way teach in their classes.
It's very similar to the Big Bang claim in the Quran. But why do scientists like Oppenheimer or so many other scientists, why do they quote
well, it makes you feel, look, I quoted things from the Rig Veda. It makes you look like you're scholarly. I mean, the point is, if you think, no, frankly, it's not so facetious. All of these works are works of literature. They're not sacred books, but they do represent the ideas of their time. And therefore, as someone who's interested in the way people think, I firmly believe in reading broadly. And it's nice if you can quote, there's wonderful poetry in the Bible. And there's and there's undoubtedly poetry in the other sacred books too. And so there's nothing wrong with quoting it as beautiful poetry.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, Professor, for your time. It's been an absolute honor, and we hope to see you a bit more involved with the ex-Muslim community as well in the future. Because
I'm happy to be involved and happy to be in, move in that direction, because
there is a huge market for your thoughts. To like India, 1.5 billion people, Pakistan, nearly 280 million people, and the Muslim world in general, who are their minds are literally exploding now. In some way, it's a bit shameful that it's happening now, but better late than never, I guess. But thank you very much for it.
It's great, and yeah, anything I can do to help that, and yeah. Anyway, you keep up the good work, as my friend Steve Weinberg has said, who's a Nobel Prize-winning physicist and an atheist, as he would say, you're doing God's work.
On that note, bye-bye, guys. See ya.
Bye-bye.